I help run the leadership stream for the Wales Leadership Forum, and Chris and I knew each other back in the day when we were just out of being students and during being students, and so and I've been involved with some of Chris's leadership training since then, which has been a great benefit to me. So I asked him along to chat to him. And I'm delighted to say he's been able to be here. So thank you, Chris.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Trevor, would you like to say a bit about yourself?
Well, I've been involved in various leadership roles all my life, but my background is very much in skiing and the ministry. But I've been sort of retired now for quite a long time. And I continue to have an interest in leadership and encouraging aspects of leadership at every opportunity. So I'm interested to pick your brains and hear more from you guys and learn as much as I can.
That would be great. Well, with just being the few of us, then I think we can make it more of a conversation than an interview. I think that would be much better. And so, Chris, I'll chip in other ways. But Chris, why don't you tell us a bit about the context of your journey of faiths and your own background?
Yeah. So not brought up in a Christian household, went to Bristol University, did economics and accounting. I spotted four guys who were different. Anthony Bash would be one, Howard Spencer, you would know, be another. And I thought to myself, they were different, better different. And that was my first year. And it wasn't until my third year at university that I became a Christian through the Navigators. I then went to Pricewaterhouse in Bristol, qualified straight through as a chartered accountant. And from a career point of view, pursued a classical accounting career for about 15 years. And then through an ethical event, because I was group finance director and chief compliance officer, I was being asked to do something with which I ethically disagreed, and I resigned without a job to go to. Julie, my wife, doesn't work for me, and our son was 4, our daughter was 2, and our mortgage was £140,000, and interest rate was 16%. Yay! But it was God's call, and I resigned. I stepped out in faith because I knew absolutely God's calling on my life, and that was the start, pretty much, of my training career, which I do now. I've been doing this now for 30 years, is leadership training. And I love it. This is absolutely God's ministry for me. I'm doing what I was born to do, what God has equipped me to do, and I absolutely love it. And through my leadership programs, I'm able to share something of the leadership lessons from the Bible, Proverbs and things, and people go, wow, where's that written from? So it's a very sort of subtle way of just proclaiming Christ through who I am and what I do. And I'm absolutely privileged to do what I do in the corporate world. I'm at 95% or more of my work is in the corporate world. I do also train all the curates in the diocese of Bristol, teaching them how to basically run organisations from a non-theological point of view, but from a practical, hands-on, how to do it. That's a quick thumbnail. So my wife is also a vicar, by the way, in the Church of England in Bristol. Yeah. Oh, and our 2 children, both boys. So Alice is married, 2 children, and our daughter is a GP in Newcastle, married, and has a daughter and another one on the way. So we have 3.5 grandchildren.
Great. And so what's your background in actual leadership yourself?
Yes. Well, I've actually been leading stuff since I've been about 14 or 15. I was in the Air Training Corps and rose to what is called a Cadet Warrant Officer and leading teams and camps. And then at PW, Pricewaterhouse, leading audit teams. And in the church context, we got married on the Saturday at Christchurch Clifton, and we were straight here at St Michael's, Stoke Gifford. And pretty much from that point on, we were leading a home group from that point on, prayer groups. And for the last however many years, I've been treasurer and trustee of both the PCC and the St Michael's Church Centre in leadership role, both at the sort of granular level, being treasurer, but also at the casting the vision level. in terms of just hearing God and what he wants for the church. And we've had to step out in faith towards that vision. And I'm delighted to say that, you know, we have a new church centre. It's we had to raise £7 million to do it, and we've only got £700,000 of loans left to pay off. So we are delighted by that. So yes, I've been involved with all that sort of front end stuff, and it is a joy to see God at work in this place. Absolutely.
Well, you talked about proverbs and things like that. What would you say are the guiding principles in the way you lead? And can you give examples of that and how that works out in practice, rather than just say this principle?
Absolutely. I think I use metaphor, and one of the things I have used all of my Christian life is the metaphor, which is this: if I'm in any situation, my metaphor is, what is the royal highway either into or out of a situation? And I pray that I would walk down the white lines of the centre of the royal highway. And for me, that's a very useful metaphor. Lord, what is the royal highway through this thing? Or if we're in a mess, the royal highway out of this thing. And so, for example, when I resigned without a job to go to, it was the Lord's will. The royal highway was I would not do what I've been asked to do. And I didn't, and I resigned. Another good example, I was at Price Waterhouse. It was my very first week at Price Waterhouse in London, a place called Southwark Towers, and it was a planned attack. I knew it was. The 6 people went ahead of me, we were all the same year. I was the last one into the lift. The doors closed behind me, and the lady who I knew from university, a lady called Caroline, she said, "Chris, we need to know, are you going to fiddle your expenses?" And I said, "Caroline, certainly not. I will claim only what I've used, no more, no less." And then she said to me, "If you don't fiddle your expenses, you will get us into trouble." And I said, "Caroline, you've got to do what you've got to do. I will do what I have to do." And then the lift went bing, the doors opened, I walked out, and they never talked to me on that subject again, except that 3 years later, I was in the senior partner's office in Bristol, and we were just chatting about stuff. And at the end of the hour's review, he said, "Oh, Chris, I just thought I should let you know, out of all the people in Price Waterhouse Bristol, yours is the only expenses form I never bother to check." And so it's about the royal highway, isn't it? What is the royal highway? And that, as a metaphor, that really does help me in my thinking. Even, you know, it's never wrong to do the right thing, even if it hurts, really. Yeah.
Trevor, have you ever been just out of interest, in situations where you've been asked to compromise or felt under pressure to?
Funnily enough, in exactly the same situation, where I was challenged about the submission of my expenses, that I was putting in too much detail and giving too much information and being too specific, and it was putting everybody else under threat. And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, that's just the way it is."
Yeah, but it's to keep that. Is to keep the SQ, this spiritual quotient of leadership, you know, is very important. Integrity, honesty, because if things go wrong, people can come to you and say, "Look, we know that you will tell the truth. What do you think about X, Y, or Z? What's the right thing to do?" And I think that's always a good question. What is the right thing to do? And it's the same metaphor as what's the royal highway, either into or through or out of a situation.
Yeah. And from the point of view of leadership, what other challenges are there? There's obviously integrity, and you've talked about that as a basic principle. Are there any other principles just about good leadership? Because the example you've given is a kind of negative example. It's a positive example because you're doing the right thing, but you are standing out against the crowd there.
That's a good question. Yes, the short answer is absolutely right. And I can give you an answer. Is that it was, I think, in leadership, one of the questions is, well, how do we get to the right answers? Well, the only way we can get to the right answers is to ask the right questions. And so as I've got older, I am more and more a fan of, convinced that as leaders, we need to be searching for the right questions. Because if we ask the right questions, then we will get the right answers. And I don't know who wrote this, but somebody said, we already have the answers. It's the questions we don't yet have. And I thought about that. We already have the answers. It's the questions we don't yet have. And I think in leadership, one of the things that we should do really good at is to ask the right questions of the people around us. And whatever our contribution is, it should be left to the back end of the queue, so we don't distort people's answers or what they think they can say or cannot say. And so it's to be a facilitator of wisdom, is to ask people the right questions. And it was Voltaire, the French philosopher, who said, you can tell more about a person through the questions they ask than the answers they give. And I think that's true. So in leadership, I think wisdom will be it's wrapped up within that. It is to pray for wisdom, and a big part of wisdom, I think, is to ask the right questions and then to listen. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. There's a fantastic proverb, Proverbs 18:13 says, if one gives answer before he hears, this is folly and shame.
Yes.
And basically, if you're going to give an answer before you've heard,
yeah,
then you're a fool. Shame on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think interesting statistic here. No, you won't be able to argue with this statistic, because it's one of those statistics you think, well, really? Jesus was asked 183 questions in the Gospels. He answered 3 directly.
Wow.
And asked another 307 questions in reply.
That is a statistic I will remember. That is absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Nobody will argue with that, because who counted?
183 questions, of which he answered 3 directly, but he responded by 307.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's great. But that illustrates the point, isn't it? It's in asking the right questions and to linger longer in that prayerful questioning state. Lord, what are the right questions we need to be asking here? And if the right people around us, we have the right people who are diverse in personality, they don't all think as we do, then, and the other proverb, which says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, plans succeed. And it's about being patient to ask the right questions. Yeah, so that's one very positive thing. I live by that all the time, asking good questions. It's in the Lamp Manual, Jeff, chapter 3 in coaching.
I've got a manual from the course I went on, Trevor. Have you got any thoughts on that, Trevor, from your experience?
I think the secret of asking questions is massive. And it's one thing that's grossly overlooked in forms of leadership. People in leadership feel that they've got to have the answers and got to tell people what the answers are without asking the questions. And so it's not just a question of not listening. It's a question of I think kind of being deaf, really, feeling that you've got to provide the answer. And I think it's a common failing. We can all fall into it without even realising it. But yeah, I think it's a massive thing.
Yeah.
In my leadership courses, Trevor, I said to people, look, I want to take off your shoulders the burden that you need to have the answers. You do not. What you have to have is the wisdom to ask the right questions. And people go, so I don't have to give all the answers. I said, no, you don't. Not at all. And it was Professor Dumbledore, that famous philosopher in the I think the second book of Harry Potter, who said to Dumbledore, he said to Harry Potter after he'd slain the basilisk, he said, Harry, you can tell more about a person by the choices they make than the capabilities they have. It's about making good choices, because you make good choices only if you ask good questions.
Yeah. Tom, you were going to say something there.
No, I was just saying.
You need to unmute.
Oh, well, I thought it was.
Oh yeah. So,
No, literally, I was just saying. No, I was literally just thinking of the Jesus thing before you said it as well, actually, which is quite funny enough. Because Maisie, who's our new church ministry apprentice, I think, if that's the word, she'd been talking about it when she came back from fall last year. So yeah, but yeah, it is a crazy statistic, isn't it? Yeah, it kind of. I guess Jesus asking the questions like makes people think about it more, because like most of the questions he did get as well were just like looking out for a direct answer, weren't they? Or most of them were probably the Pharisees trying to catch him out, weren't they?
Yeah. There's another really good proverb I love is Proverbs 18:2. It says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion."
Yep.
And okay, that's a great example about a guiding principle about the way you lead. And I think there is underneath that a servant leadership, isn't there?
Oh yes, absolutely. That is my. I say that very phrase to my leadership cohorts. It's about being a servant. How do we serve the people? Yeah, and there's a guy called Professor Greenleaf who wrote a book called Servant Leadership. Lovely, great book, Servant Leadership by Professor Greenleaf, and it's all about the attitude of a great leader being a great servant, which of course Jesus was the ultimate example.
Yes, I was going to ask that. In what way does your approach to leadership mirror that exemplified by Jesus?
Yeah.
Obviously, you've picked up on a major thing there.
Yeah.
Anything else that you, in terms of leadership, that you exemplified by Jesus?
Yeah, I think the servant leadership for me is very, very large. It's having the mindset of using our gifts to serve the body of Christ. And it says not many of us should aspire to be leaders, and there's a reason for that, because the consequences that can be large if we get things wrong. And therefore, that's why we need to ask good questions, surround ourselves with people who are not like us. If you look at Jesus, he surrounded himself with very different personalities deliberately. So Peter was an extrovert, was more read, preferring extrovert thinker. John was more feeling. You got Thomas more questioning. And then if you move on into the apostle, so Apostle Paul, was he's a reformer in my language. Luke was blue-green, so he said, "I have taken the greatest care, O Theophilus, to write to you a most orderly account, in order that you may understand what has happened here in these days." So Jesus had not only in his close circle, but people who followed, people of different personalities, and that's why I think even politicians should surround themselves with people who think differently in order to get a better solution that will be accepted by all, not just the minority. And I won't make any more political points about that.
Trevor, I could see you were in tune with that idea.
Another common failing, isn't it, of people in leadership wanting to surround themselves with people who will agree with them. And actually, that's not the mark of a good leader.
Isn't.
But I like the point you're making, Chris, about servant leadership. And I think that underlines the principle that leadership is about people and not about things.
Yes.
And not about decisions and not about projects and not about, it's actually about people.
Yes.
It's actually about developing people and empowering people and equipping people.
It is.
Because leadership involves actually leading people.
Yes.
And the old adage is that if people aren't following you, then you're not a leader.
Yes. And the funny thing is, in a year from now, for those of us who write sermons, we take 4 or 5 hours to craft a sermon. By Monday or Tuesday, they've forgotten about 90%. By Friday, most of it's gone. But I tell you what, they don't forget. People will not forget how you made them feel. So, I bet you can remember your first boss. I bet you can't remember much what he said, but you remember the impact or the impression he's left upon your life. And as leaders, we think long term, what is the impression I'll be leaving upon them? How have I valued them? How have I listened? How have I taken on board their concerns. And so, in a year's time, they will have forgotten all of our sermons, but they will not forget how we made them feel and how vulnerable we are in sharing our weaknesses in some of those sermons as to how we've got it wrong.
Yeah.
And just on that, I think as well, Jeff, for me, I think one of the most powerful things a leader can do is to say sorry. If we when we make a mistake, we go, guys, look, I've got to tell you, that was my fault. I didn't do X, Y, and Z, and I take the responsibility, and I want to apologize to you because I didn't get it right. I'm really, really sorry. And I think we lead by example. I think leaders who are willing to be vulnerable on all sorts of levels, including saying sorry, I think make more powerful leaders in terms of people who go, I want to see that level of honesty. Yeah. So vulnerability will be another one, I think, Jeff, will be in there. Yeah,
and in a sense, again, you've been talking about, the lining up with Jesus. There's the transparency of Jesus's life. And at that transparency, I don't know if you've come across the concept of front stage and backstage.
Yeah.
Where the front stage is what you present to other people, but the backstage is your actual life. And integrity is where the two are completely the same.
Yes.
And hypocrisy is where they are different. And it's always struck me, you get a Christian leader who suddenly you find that they've run off with somebody else, and you think, well, where did that come from? They were preaching last week.
Yeah.
Well, actually, they've got more integrity now than they had before, because at least they're admitting the true backstage.
Yes.
Whereas before they were just presenting a front stage that was nothing like.
Yes.
And so I think, that whole humility, transparency, of admitting wrong. Yeah, I can really see.
So powerful. And funny enough, people's respect for you increases, not decreases.
Yeah. Yeah, Trevor, you're nodding away there.
Yes, it's that transparency that I think you referred to earlier. And it's what we see in the world. It doesn't model that. And so, unfortunately, people catch on to what's being modelled in the world rather than actually what's being taught from the scriptures. So I think that this is a huge issue for us as Christians.
Yeah, we see a lot of high-profile crashes where people haven't been transparent, don't we?
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah. Well, it's almost a consequence, isn't it, of not being transparent. It's kind of just a matter of time before the slip up or the fallout or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, Proverbs says it. The man of integrity walks securely, but he who takes crooked paths will be found out.
Yes, absolutely spot on.
And it always does. Even your example of the money side of things. You walk integrity, and you talked about it, Trevor, and you're known for it. But the ones who are cheating, they're found out.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Very good. We need to press on because I want to ask where the theme of our conference is about perseverance and resilience.
Yes.
And where have you found you've needed to persevere and be resilient in your leadership? What has challenged you in your leadership?
I can tell you that one, Jeff. That the hardest thing that Julie and I have ever done in church life is to set up, run, and lead the preschool and nursery. So it's 5 days a week, opens at 8, closes at 6. We have 25 staff. And at the beginning, we were spending 2 days a week each, basically running the nursery. And I've been treasurer. My wife's Julie been chairperson for the last 20 years. I've been treasurer for about 15. And the biggest thing is staff issues, as they It always is. We have cried more over the preschool and nursery and the issue than any other area of ministry. We have lost more sleep over the preschool and nursery than any other area of ministry. And then you've got to tackle, tribunals by people who think one thing, but the truth is different. You've got to tackle, staff who suddenly fall out. And after 20 years, I have to say, we're looking forward to some retirement, I think. It's been a long road. It's been a hard road. But we absolutely know that it has been God's call on our lives to lead spiritually and sort of operationally the nursery for the good. It's a not-for-profit, it's part of the church, for the good of the community. And I can say hundreds, probably thousands of children have been through the nursery and have in some way touched God by the services, by praying up over each dinner time, by having a Bible when they leave, by coming to services. And ministry can be hard graft. And that's been one of the hardest things we've ever had to persevere with. And even now we're struggling. We've got to recruit a new manager and a new financial admin manager as well. And it's just relentless. But, God calls you to do it. And every day is a new day. And you get up and you pray and you trust God that he will bring along the right solutions. And he does. But it's hard work. It's really hard work.
Yeah. Phil, welcome.
Thank you. Apologies for being late. I misunderstood the time, so it's good to be here.
It's lovely to see you.
20 minutes.
Yeah, you could listen to we're recording it, so you can get the first 40 minutes or so, or half hour. But we're doing it more like a chat, Phil, because there's only a few of us, so we can all join in basically and contribute to the discussion, which is actually, we've really appreciated Trevor's input so far, and that's been very helpful as well. And Tom is doing the tech for us as well, although I do ask him to join in occasionally. So and I've just asked what has most needed perseverance and resilience in their leadership. We've just finished talking about transparency. I can't summarize the discussion so far. It's been too broad-ranging.
Please don't. That's fine. I'll catch up.
Good. So I must admit for myself, I think it's been the difficult conversation that in some cases I haven't had. And I was a head teacher, and I know that there were a couple of staff where I didn't have the difficult conversation I should have had. And that's because temperamentally, I don't like conflict. And I was aware of the problem. I tried to solve the problem, but I should have had the difficult conversation. And I remember one time where we got to the point, I was on the very edge of it, and I backed off. And by doing so, I did the whole of the rest of the staff a big disservice.
Interesting.
They all knew it was unfair. We were talking about proverbs and how they apply, and there's one proverb which I use a lot, rather like you said about the middle line. For me, it's love and faithfulness keep a king safe. Through love, his throne is made secure. And I wasn't faithful, and I didn't have the difficult conversation, and with more than one member of staff actually, and it hit the fan eventually.
Yeah.
And when it did hit the fan, it was far, far worse than it would have been had I had the difficult conversation those years earlier.
Yeah, very true. If you wanted to have a good book on that subject, the book is called Crucial Conversations. Crucial Conversations by an author called Joseph Glennie. Joseph Glennie. It is a fantastic book for leaders on how to have crucial conversations. Joseph Glennie, Crucial Conversations.
So, Trevor, can I say a question about you? Where have you needed most perseverance and resilience in your experience of leadership?
I think in any position of leadership, you're going to be shot at from all sides, from above and below, and from either side, and back and front. And I think the danger then is that you either become super hardened to it and learn to ignore it all, or you become super sensitive and take it all on board. And it seems to me that those two extremes are both pitfalls that you can fall into. And I kind of liken it to the need to develop the skin of a rhinoceros with the heart of a dove. We actually need both.
Yeah.
And I think the example that I use is that of Peter, who in the scriptures was a hardened outdoor type, unafraid of anything, and willing to take anything head on, tackle anything head on. And it was like he needed 3 years of working alongside Jesus to develop that sensitivity before he could actually take up his role as a leader in the church. And so I think one of the challenges of leadership is to develop both of those attributes, and then the wisdom to know when to use each of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Phil, how about you?
I think for me, I've come in obviously halfway through, so the difficult conversations is definitely one that's been very much. I think there's two others that you asked that question, but I'll just comment on the second one. One is handling strong-minded fellow leaders in teams. I think that's sometimes been quite draining. You have conversations in a leadership team, for example, of a church, and you think the meeting's going quite well, and then right at the end of the meeting, put something in that for them to unload is fine, but then you are the one that's having to go home and your wife debriefing you on that conversation. But I think the other one that's probably maybe because working with OM for about 19 years, I was used to it in some ways of training people up, and then 2 years later, at the end of 2 years, 2-year commitment, starting off again. But I think I've noticed it now in my 60s. So I would say one of the needed perseverance, resilience is training and passing on your best. And I've carefully used the word not losing your best, but passing them on, because I do see it as a positive. But it is that when you've poured your life into those in their early 20s, and then they either go off to university or coming through university, then go on to other churches, other ministries, and you're then starting again, or the cycle, not so much the cycles, you're hopefully working with others that are younger already. But I think I found that perhaps now more in my early 60s, when you begin to look at succession within the fellowship and the church, or the activities and ministries I'm involved in. That's been tough at times. I think you pour your life into someone, and then in a good sense, that, it's not always, but usually in a good sense, they move on, and God moves them on, I should say. I think for me that can be quite, you just wonder where you're going to end up. Well, that's a big question anyhow, but within your particular church or ministry, who is going to outlast you, as it were, really. That can be quite hard.
Yeah. I think we're all in the area of looking for successors. So, yeah, totally get that. Chris, can I ask you a specific thing just about, we're post-COVID now.
Yeah.
What do you feel are the main changes you've seen, the challenges of leadership due to the impact of COVID?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I'll answer it in a number of different ways. I think what I've seen, what others have seen, is in a forced sort of isolation sort of environment, those of us who are more extroverted crave to get back in the office and to remake those networks. And I think one of the difficulties there is many firms, and Pricewaterhouse is one, and lawyers, etc., they've really gone for this working at home, which might be good for overhead reduction, but it's appalling for team building. And those of us who are extroverted need the camaraderie of meeting and talking to people. And so what we've seen is that there's a real need for extroverts to get back into the workplace, the office, to network and do this stuff. On the other hand, those of us who are introverted, we work from home and go, this is great. I love working from home. Very few interruptions. I can just get my head down, do my work, and I don't have to deal with many people. I love it. And this, in one sense, there's like this polarization, really, of people wanting to get back to work, and they need to get back into work. And then those of us more introverted go, I like this hybrid working. Can I just go back 1 day a week, please? So there's something of that. I think the other thing that has happened, whereas we all used to have meetings in person, like we're doing now. I mean, what this has done around the world, this has facilitated more meetings and more network and connections than ever before. One of my biggest clients is Wrigley, the Wrigley Mars Corporation. And just in the UK, they have a big training centre in Slough. And I was talking to the head of training, Paul, recently, and he says that they are saving annually £25 million a year by migrating almost all of their training onto a virtual platform. Now, whilst that is good for the bottom line, actually, you miss out a whole ton of stuff in the meeting room as you sort of chat with people, say, what do you think about that? And you can facilitate. So there are definite benefits. There's no doubt about it, definite benefits. But there are significant losses, mainly in the area of relationships. And especially if new people join a team, it's even harder because they don't have the historical infrastructure of knowing you, knowing me, a bit of sense of humor, a bit of banter, don't take offense. So the new people don't have that coming into a team. So it's much more difficult, I think, now to form teams in a virtual environment.
Mm. And how about church? How has it affected church?
Yeah, good question too. I think at St. Michael's, I think we've got about 85% of people back in church now. However, there is a significant element who have got used to and now prefer to dial into church. Often maybe slightly older, but I think maybe for the same reasons, those of us who are more extroverted want to go back in, but those of us who are more elderly actually have found it a blessing that they can still be part of a church work remotely. So even now, I reckon we have something like, I don't know, we would probably have something between 50 to 80 people who now regularly dial in rather than attend in person. But during the Sunday, so we have a 9 o'clock traditional, we have a 10:30 family, 6:30 informal. I reckon we are now clocking, I don't know, something over 300, 340, 350 who now attend in person. But there's that significant group of people who probably will not attend again. They just stay online. So we have seen that. Now, interestingly, in addition, we've also seen an expansion of people who want to tune into us who don't live anywhere near Bristol, including Canada, New Zealand, Belgium, Scotland. So in a very weird sense, the community has geographically broadened at the same time. So pluses and minuses, Jeff, I think we've seen.
And what are the challenges for leadership for that? Because now you've got people who are under your teaching, who are coming under your teaching, but you will never see, you don't even know their names. And also you've got some people who are connected still to your church, and in some sense, you're their leader, but you never see them.
Yes,
and they never have fellowship with you. So, how does that leadership? How does that translate into the way that you lead?
So I think pastoral care is implicit in your answer. So, for example, we have about 50, 55 people who no longer can or don't come to church or have never been to church. And yet once every 4 to 6 weeks, we deliver them by hand in the area what we call a pastoral care pack. And in that pastoral care pack, there's a number of sort of verses and Bible studies, etc., and web links. And so most of them, don't come to church, but they really appreciate a personal visit every 4 to 6 weeks. So we didn't do that before, but we're doing that regularly now. I think the second part of the answer to the question would be that our website has had a lot of investment, and we have now basically a full-time virtual communications person who looks at Instagram, Twitter, and the rest, etc., where people of a younger generation can dial in quickly. So we're trying that as a way of pastoring and caring for them. And there are Bible studies online. However, there is still that loss of that personal contact to a number of people, and we're not quite sure how to overcome that. Yeah, that's as far as we've got at the moment. So we're doing 2 or 3 new things, but we haven't finished the story yet, for sure.
Yeah. Phil, how has it affected you?
I think probably very similarly to many churches. I think initially, going back a long way, you get this huge increase in folks listening virtually. When things opened up, we've probably gone back to 95% attendance, so pretty good. There are 1 or 2 that were shielding because of health. And I think a decision we need to probably make quite soon is the issue, and I guess it's the pressure, isn't it? We do stream now where we didn't used to, which is great. This one has pushed us a lot more online. But there are some that you feel sometimes. I keep on hearing stories years back of churches used to say to me, different pastors would say, we sometimes we almost have 3 different churches over a period of 3 weeks. It's almost as their attendance is 1 in 3. We never had an issue with that. That is increasingly more an issue now, whether it's because folks got used to going from their sofas over that period, and so therefore have built in new lives for themselves from their perspective. And so, we may go, there's still a good core, but there are some, and this is coming back to the pastoral issue of how you deal with folks in that circumstance who you perhaps do not see as often as you used to, because their lives have changed. And in 2 years, of course, it can relate to children. It can relate to what the children are up to and lots of other things as well. But, we've tried to seek to deal with some of the pastoral issues by strengthening our small groups and life groups. That's definitely helped. And uptake of that has been better. But, lots of things have changed. I think in many ways, the church physically, numerically has grown. And I think spiritually too has grown. Certainly we're a bigger church than we were before COVID. And there are lots of ministries that were good, but have improved and increased. So for our schools work, for example, far greater opportunities in schools than we had before. We used to go in every half a term. Now we're going in every single week into some schools. So that's brilliant. So overall encouraging, but with the growth has come, increased, coming back to that pastoral side of things of how, you had your structures in place before, but now with a bigger church, it's probably outgrown where we were and how we would seek to deal with pastorally with things.
Yeah. How about you, Trevor? Thank you, Phil.
I like what I hear from Chris in the way that they're adapting. One of the things that always troubled me about the lockdown period was how many people were simply saying, we can't wait to go back to how it was before. And I have a kind of philosophy that when God allows a crisis in our lives, it's nearly always because he wants a change of direction. And I see that from the scriptures.
Yeah.
And I think one of the problems that many churches have suffered from is that they have limited their vision to wanting to get back to how it was before. When I think God is saying, actually, we need to move on into something that's actually going to be different to what it was before. And we don't really know what that is, because when God gives us the opportunity to change direction, there's always an element of uncertainty. And very often he doesn't tell us exactly where we're going, or he doesn't tell us what the next step is. He gives us one or the other, but very rarely both. And I think it is a time of experiment. But I'm also fascinated that what you're saying, Chris, I think is true, that the majority of people who have elected not to immediately go back to church are probably the more elderly. And you would think that they would be the people who would go back to church, and it would be the young people who are much more IT conscious that wouldn't bother to go back to church. And I find that an interesting concept, interesting sort of dilemma. It's almost the opposite of what one might have expected.
Yeah,
but I think it also is the opportunity for us, and I like what Phil was saying, to look at new ways of being church. It presents different kinds of challenges, and I recognise that the idea of meeting together and building team and building relationship becomes much more difficult. But I think it's something that we need to grapple with in the current age. And I say this as someone who is a technological dinosaur, because I'm really absolutely hopeless at all this modern technology. I've never managed to get my head around it at all. But I can see the absolute necessity of it. And I think I look forward to more experimentation and more, I think just trying to break new ground and explore new opportunities, because I really feel that this is really a way of getting the message out that the church has lagged behind in the past.
Yeah. I think, so if I could just say, I'll because I want to give you the last question.
Okay.
Chris, on this, because I can see you're really. I'll let you respond to that. I was just something interesting. You missed this bit, Phil, but Chris was talking about asking the right questions at the start of this session. About leadership is partly knowing the right questions to ask rather than providing answers, and I think this would be a classic case of asking the right questions. But I interrupted this because, Chris, you were going to respond to what Trevor said.
Just very, very quickly, one of the benefits that we've experienced because of COVID, because of the use of tap and go cards have gone up massively, we've actually increased the avenues in which people can give. And so it was just either standing order cash, but now we have these, these tap and go machines for all sorts of things. And we found that whilst people no longer have cash on themselves, they would either have their iPhone, they just ping on the iPhone, or a card. And it's just about, so I think what it's done, it's making the avenues of giving easier and more culturally relevant. And that's been a surprise, but I think a good one. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, we're almost out of time now, Chris. We've only got 2 minutes left. So what advice, as we all move forward, what advice would you give to leaders in the church if you just had a couple of thoughts to say to people to leave us with?
Yeah, well, in addition to pray every day and to read the word every day to get that stream of good stuff coming through us, I would say, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, is just cultivate the skill of asking good questions. Gather around you people who don't think like you do, and basically I would also say give away more stuff. Trust the younger generation to do stuff that we did when we were 24, and let them get on with it. So we need to let go, trust the younger generation, because they've got the new ideas, they've got the new sort of parameters, and raise up the next generation of leaders by delegating and giving stuff away and trusting them to do it.
That's a real challenge, because they will do things badly at times, and we've got to watch them crash and burn and learn. So yeah, great challenge. Okay, let me pray to finish. Father, thank you for this last hour. Thank you for the time that Chris has given to us. Thank you for our discussion. And Lord, we pray that the things that we've discussed that are really worthwhile in our own lives, that you would keep with us by your Spirit and help us to take them and apply them.
Excellent.
Father, thank you for the privilege of leadership, of being part of what you are doing in this world. And Lord, pray that through us you would build your kingdom and use us in that process.
Yes, Lord.
And so we thank you for our time together. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
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 Amen.